Good morning, everyone. Today's national webinar is to pay our homage to the father of the nation, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, also known as Mahatma Gandhi or Gandhiji to many. The webinar is dedicated to this person whose principles and values are even today being considered instrumental. On that note, I request Ms. Deepa S., HOD, Humanities Department, to officially welcome the audience and dignitaries.
Good morning, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the national webinar on Politics and Religion, Reflection on Gandhi's Moral Political Philosophy. The Department of Political Science, Indian Academy Degree College Autonomous, Bangalore, is honored to organize this national webinar to commemorate the 151 birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi on October 2nd. The session is intended to throw some lights on the matters of Gandhi's moral political philosophy. Now I welcome our chairman, Dr. T. Somashekar, secretary, Mrs. T. Bharati, and COO in absentia for their consent to organize this webinar. It is indeed a special privilege to welcome an eminent resource person who is an apt speaker for the topic of this webinar. On behalf of Indian Academy Degree College Autonomous, I welcome Professor Rajaram Todpadi, Director, in charge of Nehru Study Center and former Professor, Department of Political Science, Mangalore University. Hearty welcome to you, sir. I take this opportunity to welcome Dr. E. Jerome Xavier, Principal, Indian Academy Degree College Autonomous, who has been the pillar of support to faculty members in all their endeavors. I welcome you, sir. I extend a warm welcome to all the participants of this webinar and request you all to make the best use of it. Welcome you all.
Thank you, ma'am. I would like to call upon our beloved principal, Dr. E. Jerome Xavier, to kindly deliver the preliminary remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Professor Rajaram, the director in charge of Nehru Study Center and former professor of the Department of Political Science, Mangalore University, Mangalore. We are honored to have you this morning with us to share your knowledge, wisdom, and understanding on Mahatma Gandhi, particularly on a topic like moral political philosophy, which is quite challenging to every individual. I am not too sure why our professor has chosen such a topic which will actually invite everybody to think, reflect personally on this topic, more than a general topic wherein individuals are not involved. It is moral, political philosophy. Thank you, Professor, for choosing such a challenging topic, which will make everyone to pay attention and listen, particularly the teaching fraternity who will join us this morning and the students community. We all are aware, and we have celebrated yesterday the birthday of Mahatma Gandhiji, remembering him for the contributions that he has made to our nation in a very, very special way in bringing us freedom. Albert Einstein, I'm told, has said that Mahatma Gandhi is one of the greatest human beings who has lived on earth. And in future, people, the generations to come will wonder that such a kind of person had lived. It is true that not all of us can genuinely and totally emulate what Gandhi has done out of his selflessness in service to the society, particularly for the downtrodden, the poor, the marginalized, and who are downcast. He had a big heart to every Indian human beings from north to south, east to west. He understood our nation very well, that India is a country of diverse culture, hundreds and thousands of religious practices, the caste system that separated human beings, and the political situation that was prevailing in those days. Having understood the diversity of all this, he wanted to have a united India. And I'm sure he strongly believed in unity in diversity. And it's not easy for a man who had been highly educated and who had a fantastic job as barrister abroad to come back to India and to give himself, surrender his will, surrender his own personal ambitions and goals for the sake of the nation. That requires courage, that requires will, that requires tremendous amount of willpower to carry out and unite people of the nation. We are always grateful to our Mahatma Gandhiji. I am glad that the Department of Political Science has taken initiative to find a wonderful and eminent scholar in the field of political science, Professor Rajaram, and requesting him to share his wisdom with the teaching fraternity and the student community in remembrance of Gandhiji. Thank you, sir, once again for accepting our invitation. I am sure all of us will be glad and will learn a lot of things from your wisdom and knowledge. Thank you very much. Have a good time, my dear participants.
Thank you, sir, for those encouraging words. I now request Mr. Prashant SP, Assistant Professor, Department of Political Science, to give a brief introduction on our Honorable Speaker, Mr. Rajaram Tolpadi.
It's my pleasure and honor to introduce our today's speaker, Professor Rajaram Tolpadi. Professor Rajaram Tolpadi, sir, has completed MA in Political Science from Banaras Hindu University and received a PhD from Bangalore University for his thesis on Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia, a critical examination of his basic ideas in the background of socialist movement in India. Sir has served as a professor in the Department of Political Science of Mangalore University. Sir has a proficiency in both English and Kannada languages. Sir has published many articles and books in English and Kannada. To mention few of them are towards an understanding of third sector in a chapter in a third sector research, third sector research center, University of Mysore, civil society in India, a chapter in Civil Society Voice, which was a special edition of one publication, New Delhi. The socialist discourse in India, in political ideologies in modern India, a Sage publication, New Delhi. Reconstructing democratic concerns in India, a chapter in Indian democracy, problems and prospects, Anthem Press, New Delhi. Context, discourse and vision of Lohia's socialism, article, a special issue in Economic and Political Weekly on Lohia. It was a special issue on Lohia. And ಲೋಹ್ಯವಾದದ ಕೆಲವು ಟಿಪ್ಪಣಿಗಳು, it was published in Bandaya Sahitya Sangathan in the year 1986 in Mangalore. Lohiavadada Shava Parikshe, Postmortem of Lohiaism, which was published in Arivu Baraham in the year 1990. Komuvada Kelavu Tatvika Charchegalu, Communalism, Some Theoretical Debates, which was published in Karnataka Sahitya Academy, Bangalore in the year 1992. ಜಾಗತೀಕರಣದ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಗಾಂಧೀಜಿ ವಿಚಾರಗಳು, Gandhi's ideas in the context of globalization in Vidyasanga, Vitla in the year 2001. Dharma Mattu Rajakya, Religion and Politics, which was published in Dharma Vishwakosha of, in Kannada University Hampi in the year 2002. Sir has also presented many research papers in national and international seminars. To mention two of them are Gandhi's Conception of Religion and Politics, a paper presented at the National Seminar on Gandhi's Relevance to Contemporary Theory and Practices, which was organized by the Department of Politics and Public Administration, Pune University, Pune in the year 1995. The social science scenario in Karnataka, which was a paper presented at the National Seminar on Methodology in Social Science, which was organized by MIDS, Chennai, and Department of Political Science, Mangalore University. Reconstructing Democratic Concerns in India, a paper presented at the Center for the Study of Developing Studies, ESTS, Delhi, 2004. Dynamics of Hindutva Politics in India, which was a paper presented at the International Conference on Third Sector, which was organized by ISDR at Bangkok in the year 1999. Changing Context of Civil Society in India, a paper presented at the 5th International Conference on the Third Sector Research, organized by ISDR Cape Town. Okay, except for the ones mentioned, his articles have been published in newspapers like Udayavani and Deccan Herald, and sir is also a regular contributor to Prajavani, which is a Kannada daily. So currently, Professor Rajarami Tolpadi sir is working as the director in charge of Nehru Study Center, Mangalore University. Thank you.
Thank you, Prashant sir, for briefing us on today's honorable guests. I now request, sir, you can start the session. Rajaram sir, over to you.
Thank you. First of all, let me thank Principal of Indian Academy College and my friend, student friend, Prashant, for giving me this opportunity to speak to the students on Gandhi. The topic that I have chosen to speak is actually religion and politics. In the context of religion and politics, I wish to actually highlight certain aspects of Gandhi's political philosophy. As a principal has very rightly suggested, that moral political philosophy is a very high-sounding phrase, and I don't know whether I'll be able to actually reach up to that. But what I really want to intend to do is actually to reflect on Gandhi's political philosophy, focusing more on his ideas with regard to religion and politics. Let me first of all say why I have chosen this topic, religion and politics in Gandhi. Because this gives me a vast canvas. Because much of what Gandhi wrote, said, and did is pertaining to religion and politics. And is also pertaining to a particular kind of relationship that he established between religion and politics. So religion and politics is the vast canvas that enables me to pick up the kinds of ideas that I wish to and organize it in a particular way so as to reflect on certain aspects of Gandhi's political philosophy. So it's actually a very, very broad framework within which I wish to highlight a few things which I am very fond of. Now, let me also say, this is going to be the second reason as to why I have chosen religion and politics in Gandhi. Second is, that Gandhi had a very distinct idea of religion and a very distinct idea of politics. And he also established a very distinctive relation between religion and politics. This is something very rare, because we are in an age of secularism. We are in an age of reason. We are in an age of science and progress. And in this context of science, progress, rationality, secularism, democracy, Gandhi proposes a very distinct kind of a perspective. I'm not suggesting that Gandhi's conception of religion and politics and the kind of relationship that he establishes between them is, not rational or not democratic. I'm not suggesting anything like that. But then I think it enables us to look at the questions, certain central questions of our time, certain central problems of our time, in a very fresh kind of a perspective. So Gandhi does not generally think the way we today think. He does not draw, so to speak, a distinction between religion and politics that we generally do. He actually prioritizes, in a certain sense, a very distinctive idea of religion, which I would like to, get into, and establishes a relation between religion and a very distinctive kind of politics that he envisions. Now, that framework, is very important in terms of understanding what is the kind of political philosophy, what is the kind of moral political philosophy that he, pursued all through his political career. And the term moral political philosophy is not my term. I think quite a few people who have worked on Gandhi, quite a few scholars who have worked on Gandhi, have said that Gandhi's political philosophy is intrinsically, essentially, ethical or moral. So therefore, I would rather, presume that, Gandhi's political philosophy is moral, and that therefore, idea of religion is very central to Gandhi. The third sort of clarification, before I proceed, that I would like to give you, is that there is a lot of global scholarship on Gandhi today. I personally think that it is not very easy to talk about Gandhi. Certain ideas of Gandhi, like Satya, Satyagraha, Ahimsa, Sarvodaya, are known to us in the sense that, we have heard those words. But what does Gandhi mean by Satya? What is the relationship between Satya and Satyagraha? What is Ahimsa? What is Sarvodaya? As you go into the substantive aspects of these ideas, I think you find, Gandhi very difficult. As a lot of people have suggested, that there is an easy Gandhi, and there is also a very difficult Gandhi. There is a very simple Gandhi. There is also a very complex Gandhi. And I would like to actually focus on both, because the simplicity of Gandhi is also important, and the philosophical complexity of Gandhi also becomes important. The point I'm suggesting, is that there is a global scholarship on Gandhi, which is also another reason as to why, it's difficult to talk about Gandhi. Not only Indians, lot of, non-Indians, so to speak, British, American scholars, are quite prolific on Gandhi. They have written and said, very significant things about Gandhi. So in the context of global scholarship on Gandhi, it becomes again difficult to speak about Gandhi, to speak something very significant about Gandhi, because much of these scholars have already talked about the most significant aspects of Gandhi's political thought as well as Gandhi's political practice. Having said that, let me go into the kinds of issues that I would like to highlight in this context. First, as I said, that Gandhi's political philosophy is religious. That religion is central to Gandhi's politics. When I say religion, I should also add, that it is not only religion, but also spiritual. Spirituality is an aspect of Gandhi's perspective of religion. Or maybe, the term religion is not that sufficient to explain what is the kind of moral, spiritual, ethical philosophy that Gandhi represents. Maybe, I should be using the term dharma. Gandhi's politics is deeply entrenched in a conception of dharma. And dharma, as we all know, has multiple meanings and multiple, interpretations. We use dharma in so many different contexts. So Gandhi, of course, holds on to a very distinctive idea of dharma as moral conduct, as a certain kind of deep faith in the spiritual qualities of human beings. All that is, I think, part of Gandhi's idea of dharma. That Gandhi considers that human beings are deeply moral, and that the moral, internal moral character of human beings, needs to be preserved and promoted. And Gandhi also, was subscribing to a certain religious faith, which we today call as Hinduism. It is also Vaishnavism. It's a very distinctive kind of a religious faith, in which he was born and brought up. He has never discarded that particular tradition that he represented. But then Gandhi was open to other kinds of religious traditions and include the essential virtues of other kinds of religious traditions, particularly Christianity, to which he was introduced, when he was in England and subsequently in South Africa. A lot of people have suggested that, that is a significant impact of Christianity, on Gandhi's, quote unquote Hinduism or Vaishnavism. And people have also criticized Gandhi for that, that he is some sort of a disguised Christianity, disguised Christian. And Gandhi had hardly any problem about that kind of a comment, because, that he has acknowledged that Christianity has deeply influenced him. So likewise, I think Islam, Jainism, Buddhism are, certain significant, religious traditions about which, Gandhi was very sensitive, and he tried to include, all those different kinds of, traditions into his larger idea, religious worldview, spiritual, moral worldview. And that what is important is that he did not consider that this perspective of religion, which has multi-dimensions, which is very complex, and which is also, something that has evolved over a period of time in his political practice, that he did not consider that religion is separate from politics, and that, politics should be pursued very differently and very independently of religion. Now, this is, what I said, is something very distinct. This you don't see in quite a few, leaders of India. There is a very strong, religious, spiritual tradition of reform in India, from the 19th century onwards to the present. You can identify quite a few, very important social reformists, who deeply believed in, a certain kind of religion as a social phenomenon. But then Gandhi, as a very distinct nationalist leader, as a very distinct, practitioner of politics, believed that politics is part of religion, is integral to religion, or it is very deeply interwoven to religion. And not only religion, I think, Gandhi's religion is a larger world perspective in which, every aspect of life is included. And that the function of religion and the function of politics to Gandhi are the same. Religion, upholds truth, and politics fights falsehood. So it is in this sense of, religion upholds truth and politics fights falsehood. I think he combines religion and politics. And that this perspective, a very deeply religious, spiritual perspective of politics, I think is something that Gandhi evolves over a period of time in terms of his acquaintance with a large number of intellectual traditions, both Indian as well as Western. Now, there is a tendency when we start talking about Gandhi, that Gandhi, we tend to depict Gandhi as a very, very distinctly Indian. There is a distinct Indianness about Gandhi. I am not denying that. But then there is also a very significant, influence of the West on Gandhi, which also need to be, very, very clearly recognized. And very importantly, the kind of Western influence on Gandhi was a very different set of influences. Very different in the sense that, a lot of people, during Gandhi's time, before and after, were influenced by, certain kinds of, what we today call as, liberal traditions of thought. It could be Nehru after Gandhi, or it could be C.R. Das before Nehru. I think a lot of Indians, who are part of the nationalist movement, and who are also part of the social reform movements, I think were greatly influenced by different facets of liberalism in the West. What is distinct about Gandhi? I think Gandhi was not greatly influenced by liberalism. On the other hand, Gandhi was influenced by a moral, spiritual, traditions to which he was introduced both in England and South Africa. Professor Vinay Lal, who is a great scholar on Gandhi, says that Gandhi's the influence on Gandhi. Gandhi was influenced by the other of the West, what the West has always considered not very significant. Thinkers like Carlyle, thinkers like Ruskin, Thoreau. These scholars don't figure in the front line scholarship of the West. We all know, as students of humanities, we all know the dominant liberal tradition. Starting from Hobbes to Locke and others. Gandhi was aware of those different so-called liberal traditions, but he was more influenced by spiritual and moral traditions, or religious traditions, or more specifically Christian traditions of thought. Tolstoy, Ruskin, and others. Now, as a result of which, the kind of politics that he was pursuing both in South Africa and subsequently in India is very, very different. And I would like to actually highlight, try to show, or try to argue out how this politics is different from the kind of politics that we generally think of. Now, in order to highlight the distinctive ideas of Gandhi with regard to politics, I think I need to rely on the most important text, very well, widely acknowledged text of Gandhi, Hind Swaraj. I'm not going to talk about, Hind Swaraj at length, but I think Hind Swaraj is the quintessential statement of Gandhi's political philosophy. and that therefore, I need to actually spend a little time on Hind Swaraj, and on the basis of which, I would like to actually tease out what are the most significant aspects of politics that emerges from Hind Swaraj. We all know that Hind Swaraj was written in 1908, when Gandhi was returning from England to South Africa. Gandhi was in the midst of struggle in South Africa, but he was all the time, concerned about what was happening in India. At that given point in time, nationalist movement was slowly emerging in India, and a lot of people in England, had different kinds of views about, Indian nationalism, or different kinds of views about how India should be free. What are the ways by which we should adopt to attain India's independence? And there were very strong kinds of militant nationalists in England, including Savarkar, with whom Gandhi had discussions. And while coming back after his discussion, Gandhi actually wrote a very brief book called Hind Swaraj, which a lot of scholars consider as the quintessential statement of his political philosophy. Now, two things become very, very important as I see it in Hind Swaraj. There are two very striking distinctions about Hind Swaraj. One, that Hind Swaraj was written in his travel, or in his sea voyage from England to South Africa, which is to say that it was written in a transnational space. It is not bound by nationalism. It was not confined to a particular nation or the liberation of a particular nation, because the space in which it was written, I think, is very important for me. So I would like to actually characterize it as transnational space. Secondly, it was written in a span of over 20 days, as though he was writing it in some kind of a spiritual fervor, because he did not think about anything else. I think he spent all the time in the ship, when whatever pieces of paper that were available, wrote this this particular book, Hind Swaraj. Now, I would consider that Hind Swaraj is a very special kind of a spiritual revelation for Gandhi. And two, that it was written in a space which is utterly free, not bound by, not confined by, not restrained by any idea of nation. So if you look at Hind Swaraj, I think Hind Swaraj is a global text. That Gandhi was of course talking about two things. One, that he was critiquing what we today call as modern civilization. He said that modern civilization is materialistic and that it is enslaving all of us. Now, whether Gandhi's critique of Western civilization is very adequate or not is a very different question, and I don't want to dwell on that. But the point that I'm highlighting is that it is a critique of modern Western civilization as materialistic. And Gandhi was proposing an alternative. And this alternative, of course, he locates in India, but it is not India-centric. It is not about India as such. He refers to India, he refers to Indian civilization as a moral alternative, moral, spiritual, other to the materialist civilization of the West. So there, the reference to Indian civilization is actually contingent. It is in terms of saying that we have to achieve something else. We have to get ourselves free from modern civilization, which is materialistic, and rediscover our spiritual and moral dimensions. So to rediscover man's spiritual and moral dimensions, I think Gandhi makes reference to Indian civilization. Now, this I think is very important for me. And he also says, in Swaraj, that it is not about the fight in what is happening, in India, that the struggle, independence movement is not against the British at all. Because he wants that the British should be part of this larger struggle, which is happening in India, incidentally. That this is a larger struggle against modern civilization, which is enslaving all of us. Through its materialism, through its centralization, through its machinery. These are all the significations of modern Western civilization. It is not Western civilization in that sense, it is modern civilization. Now, India happens to be an alternative. Now, as you read in Swaraj, and I think all of us, more importantly, students of the younger generation, actually should read in Swaraj over and over again. And as you read more and more in Swaraj, I think new ideas would emerge. These new ideas may not be Gandhi's own ideas. I think it's something that you rediscover or discover in terms of your reading in Swaraj. I think 2-3 things become very, very important for me in terms of my own limited reading of Hind Swaraj. One is that Hind Swaraj to me is a critique of nationalism. We all think that Gandhi is the father of the nation and that India is a nation. Yes, India is a nation, but Gandhi was, I think, subsequently to become one of the most important leader of the Indian nationalist movement. But very importantly, Gandhi did not believe in the idea of nation or the ideology of nationalism. This might appear a little strange, but I want to actually emphasize on that. I'm not suggesting that he was rejecting the idea of India as a nation. There is the idea of India, as Sunil Kilnani calls it. There is a very rich idea of India in Gandhi. But then that idea of India need not be India as a nation. For Gandhi, this idea of India, the India as a civilization, as a moral alternative to the material civilization. This is very important for me. This is very important for me, not to reject nationalism, but to make nationalism, critical, or place nationalism in a critical perspective. I'm not suggesting that nationalism has to be rejected. It's not possible to reject nationalism. But then, nationalism should always be, we have to have a criticality into nationalism. That's one, great lesson, that I think, I learned from my own, reading of Hind Swaraj. Second, also equally important, that by providing a normative alternative to Western civilization, Gandhi was actually, reconstructing, a very different story of India. It's not, the story of, great heroes and great achievements. It's a story of how common people, live their lives peacefully, live their lives in negotiation with others, live their life, in terms of a certain sense of the other and a certain respect for the other. Now, Swaraj, to my mind, has 2 dimensions. One is, an external dispensation. By Swaraj, Gandhi meant a certain kind of external organization, which is a decentralized village republic. India has to be, has been historically and has to be after independence, a huge space, constituted by village republics. Gram Swaraj is for Gandhi Gram Swaraj. So there is an external, decentralized polity that Gandhi conceives of in Swaraj, and there is an internal, internal reconstruction of the moral self, which to my mind is very important, or more important than the external dispensation that he has always been talking about. So Gandhi is a great champion of the village. Now, what is this village? This village is not a historical entity. Of course, Gandhi polemically would argue that this was there in India's history, but then for him it is something that we have to construct in the future. Village is not the historical past. Village is our future identity. And that is one part of the story, the external organization of the polity. Decentralized village republics. India has a land of decentralized village republics. Internally, you have to be a moral being. I would use this word moral being than the individual, because individual is a liberal idea by and large. And liberalism has characterized the individual and a philosophy of individualism, which we today call as liberalism. On the conception of discrete entity of the individual. Each individual is discrete and in a certain sense independent of others, and that entire society liberalism constructs as constituted by independent and discrete individuals. But Gandhi would argue that Swaraj is an internal organization of the self as a moral human being. And if you are a moral human being, with a certain capacity to listen to the voice of the internal self, I think you would connect yourself to the larger world. So Gandhi's Swaraj also has an internal, equally important internal, dimension of conceiving a moral self as against, let us say, a liberal individual self. And to reconstitute your moral self, I think you have to have, a certain idea of Satya, which is, very central to Gandhi. And also, of course, ahimsa, entire political discourse of Gandhi, I think, is premised on ahimsa. And ahimsa, is not, something contrary to himsa, as something opposite to ahimsa. To Gandhi is a complete concept in itself. It is not the opposite of himsa. It is non-violence is not the opposite of violence. It is, an entity in itself. And Gandhi foregrounds the idea of ahimsa in his larger conception of Swaraj. And therefore, there is an idea of truth. Truth is not something, that is already there. Even if it is already there, I think you have to experiment with truth. You have to, strive to understand what that truth is. And once you know what the truth is, you should insist on the truth. Satyagraha. So once you through your experiment come to recognize truth, I think you have to insist on truth. So satyagraha, so satya, leads to satyagraha, and satyagraha leads to actually, self-control, because Gandhi would give a very different idea of, let us say, freedom. Freedom, as we understand it, is, giving, all kinds of options to human beings to do whatever he or she wants to do, of course, within the framework of law. But Gandhi would say freedom is self-control. You have to control yourself. So Swaraj is, in one occasion, more than one occasion, Gandhi has said, is self-control. So there is the idea of self-control. There is the idea of sarvodaya, because ultimately, you have to have a society which emancipates all. So in a certain sense, Swaraj is some kind of an internal reconstitution of the self. The capacity of the self to discover what truth is, and the capacity of the self to, insist on Satya. So the moment you stop insisting on Satya, I think there is no Swaraj. I would even venture to say that Satyagraha is the quintessence of Gandhi's political philosophy. Because once you stop recognizing what is truth and insist on it, there is no Swaraj possible. So Swaraj is basically relying upon a certain conception of truth and insistence on truth. Now, this is a very distinct kind of a political philosophy that that Gandhi proposes in the context of his political practice. That's also very important. That this idea of Swaraj, which he has never given up. It might have been marginalized, in Indian politics, in the freedom struggle, because Gandhi was a part of a larger movement. And the Congress movement, the Congress nationalist movement, I think went beyond Swaraj. But then, Gandhi never, gave up the idea. Ever since he conceived this idea of Hind Swaraj as he travels from England to South Africa, he persists with that. Of course, reworks that and never actually gives up that idea at any point of time in his political career. Now, having said that, that Hind Swaraj is the text in which you actually see Gandhi's political philosophy in its quintessence, and I have also enumerated some of the components, theoretical components of Gandhi's idea of Swaraj. Swaraj as self-control, Swaraj as truth, Swaraj as insistence on truth, Satya, Satyagraha, Swaniyantran, Sarvodaya, constitutes the components of Swaraj, which is primarily premised on the idea of ahimsa. Now, what this has to do with today's time, our time, good ideas. Shall we say that these are fine ideas? I think that Gandhi, to my mind, is more relevant to us today than ever before, because I think we are into a very, very difficult time, and we are into a very difficult world, which I think which is continuously undermining our capacity as human beings, our capacity as moral entities, and that therefore we need to actually go back to Gandhi, reconceptualize. It's not simply taking lessons from Gandhi. I mean, taking lessons from Gandhi in a very positive sense of the term, but I think reconceptualize Gandhi. It's not that Gandhi has already told you the truth and that you are only to follow it. I think Gandhi's truth needs to be revisited. Gandhi's Satyagraha and the methodological protocols of Satyagraha needs to be reworked. Gandhi's idea of Sarvodaya needs to be reconstituted, because world is changing and changing so fast. I think there are quite a few identifiable challenges to human moral self today, which is Gandhi's central concern. One is, I think, the way in which corporate capitalism is becoming so powerful, and also nation becoming so powerful, and a certain kind of technology becoming overpowering. I think the human self, the human moral self, is, I think, is continuously being undermined, and Gandhi becomes, I think, a very apt reminder of what we are and what we should be doing. Having said that, I think I'll just say two things and close my presentation. One is that Gandhi's political philosophy as such offers I think a very significant critique of liberalism, in which we are caught up. Gandhi, of course, there is a certain impact of liberalism on Gandhi, but more importantly, I think there is a critique of liberalism in Gandhi, because in our age of neoliberalism, in our age where we generally think that we are separate and discrete entities, and we have our self-interest, and we have to pursue it, what Habermas has called as instrumental rationality. I think we are carried away by instrumental rationality. We think that our self-interest need to be protected and promoted. This is actually the quintessence of neoliberalism. It may not be the quintessence of liberalism, but the kind of new liberalism that has emerged today. I think this is the quintessence. That you look at your self-interest, promote it as far as possible. Now, against, I think there is a very strong, which needs to be further explored, critique of liberalism in Gandhi, and that in the present context of dominance of liberalism, this critique is, to my mind, very important. Second, I think we need to actually very significantly reconstitute our idea of secularism. I'm not suggesting that we need to give up secularism. I mean, it's not possible. In a very broad interpretation, Gandhi is also a very secular, although he did not use that term at all. But then I think in the context of India, in the context of multi-religiosity in India, in the context of multiculturality in India, I think we need to actually reconstruct or reconstitute the secular agenda, because secularism has not taken sufficient interest in, and it has not recognized sufficiently the significance of religion and culture. Because to my mind, to the extent I understand, I think secularism looks very dry to me. It has no capacity to understand religiosity. It has no capacity to, I think, handle religious conflicts, and so on. I'm not rejecting secularism. I'm rejecting a particular kind of secularism, which is being practiced and popularized today. That need to be, I think, a very significant redefinition of secularism, and Gandhi would be of some use to us in that kind of a redefinition. So I think I have put across a few ideas in a very disjointed way. I hope you can take this up, you can discuss this, and we can also raise issues with this. You are free to disagree with whatever I have said, but whatever it is, I think I would be very thankful. Now I am very thankful to the principal, to the college management, to all those people who are responsible for organizing this webinar on Gandhi. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for those thought-provoking insights on politics and religion, reflections on Gandhi's moral political philosophy. We have a few questions addressed by the participants. So I would request Ms. Uma Shankari V to kindly address the questions to our speaker.
There's a question, sir. After 70 years of freedom of Swaraj, why village republics are witnessing to gang rape, kind of atrocities on Dalits, Athras, gang rape? It is asked by Raghu, sir.
My simple answer to this question is that we haven't have Swaraj at all. We are politically independent because of a particular kind of nationalist movement that was launched. But then political independence need not necessarily mean Swaraj. So Gandhi, if you look at Gandhi and Gandhi's participation in the nationalist movement and the kind of marginalization Gandhi himself, I think, experienced in the nationalist movement, explains this. That by the middle of the 1930s, I think Gandhi was no longer a significant force in the nationalist movement. And Indian National Congress, which was spearheading the nationalist movement, I think did not care to, look at the kind of ideas that Gandhi represented. Hind Swaraj was forgotten. In fact, Nehru in 1939, when Gandhi asked him to reread Hind Swaraj, Nehru said, that he has read Hind Swaraj, and Hind Swaraj doesn't appeal to him at all. Nehru and the entire Congress leadership, I think, was in total disagreement with the kind of political ideas, political moral ideas that Gandhi was representing. So I think I would say that political independence is not automatically Swaraj. I think we have established a nation state. We have established a nation state, and that this nation state is actually the logical outcome of the nationalist movement. And Gandhi appears to be an odd man out in this particular ideological trajectory of the establishment of the nation state in India. So we do not have Swaraj. And atrocities on women, Dalits, etc., I think it's a very serious matter, and that I think it is to be addressed in a very different context. I don't know, particularly in the context of the Gandhian idea of Swaraj, because Gandhi would say that Swaraj is not for a small section of the people. Swaraj is for everyone. Because Gandhi saw in everyone the moral human self, whether he's a Dalit or a tribe, a woman, North India, South India. All of us are respectable human beings with a moral self. So Hind Swaraj is actually a text of the common man. And I think the atrocities on the Dalits and the women, I think the Indian state and the kind of society that has evolved in India needs to be I think that this entire question has to be looked from the perspective of what is the Indian state today, and what is the Indian society today, and why that Indian society is extremely, conflicting kind of a society, a very unequal kind of a society, very exploitative kind of a society, where Swaraj is not even discussed as an idea.
Thank you, sir. There is another question by Dr. Anita Rao. She has asked two questions. Okay, first one is, can you elaborate on Sarvodaya in post-modern world, sir? And the second question is, how do we reconcile Swaraj in an intensely competitive consumerist society?
I think both are very difficult questions. One, of course, I would say that, Sarvodaya is a logical extension of Swaraj. There cannot be Swaraj without, every one of us, is free in the Gandhian sense of the term. Everyone is emancipated in the Gandhian sense of the term. Everyone is, able to realize his self. So Sarvodaya is Swaraj, the logical extension of Swaraj. And how do we reconceptualize Swaraj in the present context? I don't have an immediate answer to that. I think it all depends upon how are we going to talk to one another. How are we going to organize ourselves in smaller ways in terms of groups? How are we going to actually counter, all those, dangers of Swaraj in terms of our own, creative human intervention? It all depends on that. I think there is nothing like, an already available alternative. The alternative needs to be worked out, in terms of continuous and consistent human interaction and human intervention.
Thank you, sir. There's another question. What are the dynamics of present-day village republics of India? This is by Raghu. Sir?
I said that Gandhi was not referring to any historical entity of village. Of course, he made reference to village republics in India, but it's not a historical reference. It's more a metaphorical reference. Gandhi did not believe that there was a village in India which was independent. Although, for the sake of a certain kind of polemics, he might have argued that India's past was independent village republics. But then Gandhi was positing in Swaraj a utopia called village. A village is something that you have to pursue in the future, that you have to envision in the future. It is not something that existed in the past. This is something that you have to create in the future. So it is more of a critical utopia, and that this entire history of whatever decentralization and Panchayati Raj, I think, has very little to do with the kind of Gandhian vision. This is the post-independent India's political development and the state kind of attempt to make politics decentralized. So I think the history of Panchayati Raj and the entire history of village republic, so-called village, there is nothing like village republic. I think subsequent historians have very, very clearly pointed out that I think village republic is Gandhi's dream rather than a historical reality in India. So I think there is any parallel in India, which you can think of some kind of a Gandhian vision. I think the Gandhian vision is to be achieved in the future, rather than something that exists already in the present.
Thank you, sir. So there's a question by Trishala. Can any of Gandhi's teaching be applied in the context of India's foreign relations, with particular regards to resolving conflicts with bordering states?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's a very important question. Although I'm not an expert in international relations, but I very seriously think that in terms of resolving, international conflicts or conflicts across nations, in terms of establishing, enduring peace, I think the Gandhian method, I think is most important. But it is not merely a method. It is not merely a strategy. There is a larger world vision, in Gandhi. And unless, the world vision is understood, I think you cannot apply, any of Gandhi's ideas in elements. Or, Gandhi has a holistic idea of the world, a non-violent, peaceful world. And in order to achieve that non-violent, peaceful world, I think Gandhi suggests certain strategies. So that strategies have to be applied, applied in the full awareness of the kind of larger vision that Gandhi has. So therefore, I think Gandhi would be, in my opinion, one of those, I think, great world thinkers, because Gandhi never thought of India, as a separate kind of a nation having its own self-interest. As I have already pointed out, I think, Gandhi's India is a connected India to the larger world. That's one, aspect of Gandhi. Although of course, Gandhi would say that, each village, has to be autonomous. See, there is a very complex kind of a connection, that Gandhi establishes, between, the village republic and the larger world. So Gandhi would, to my mind, is a philosopher of the world. So, world peace, non-violent, resistance, satyagraha, civil disobedience are, I think, the most effective weapons, I think, even in terms of resolving conflicts across nations. But, as I said, that Gandhi would not consider nations as very important entities. So therefore, it requires a lot of, I think, rethinking, both in terms of the substantive aspect as well as in terms of the methodological grids of applying Gandhian idea in terms of resolving, conflicts, both international as well as intranational.
Thank you, sir. There is another question from FB by Mohit Kumar. In Gandhi philosophy village, Kutir Udyog and agriculture is base of country, but why not any government emphasize plan for this?
Obviously, because one, I think Gandhi, that's the point that I tried to highlight right in the beginning, that Gandhi offers us a worldview. Gandhi offers us a life vision, which is very different from what we are living today. Gandhi's idea of politics, Gandhi's idea of religion, Gandhi's idea of human self, Gandhi, I think everything that Gandhi suggests is very different from what we are seeing today, very different from what we are experiencing today. As I said, Gandhi is a very odd person out. He appears to be, at least today, a very alien kind of a person. Someone, who begins to question your common sense. Someone who begins to question the dominant ideas of today. So to my mind, Gandhi becomes some kind of a critical space on the basis of which, you look at what is happening today, whether in terms of nation, whether in terms of agriculture, whether in terms of industry. I think the state today, whether the central government or the state, would not be interested in the Gandhian agenda, because Gandhian agenda is not is not the product of the kind of ideological formation of the Indian state. Gandhian agenda is the critical space from which you critique everything that you see and experience. So it is not very surprising that none of the Gandhian ideas are adopted in terms of our agricultural policy, in terms of our political policies, in terms of our institutions, in terms of all those aspects of our life.
Thank you, sir. There's a question by Ratir Abid. As we know, the arenas and aspirations of people have changed over time. The concepts have changed. How far Gandhi's ideology of education is applicable in present materialistic world?
Of course, everything is changing, and Gandhi was also aware of that. And Gandhi was himself, has changed some of his positions very drastically, particularly, on the question of Varna, on the question of caste, on the question of, on, rural employment. I think change is actually one of the most striking aspects of, Gandhi's political practice. And he says that, that none of his ideas are static. And if he has said something at one point in time and something else at another point in time, he said that what he has said at another point in time should be accepted. It's not that, Gandhi is an unchanging kind of Gandhi's political philosophy. Gandhi's political philosophy is actually a philosophy of evolution, a philosophy of formation, and a philosophy that gets its shape in terms of all kinds of different kinds of dialogues that he has had. And that's the point that I should have said right in the beginning, that Gandhi is a product of dialogue, whether it's dialogue with Ambedkar, dialogue with Tagore, dialogue with Vaikam, Tiruvankur Pandits, dialogue with socialists. He has dialogued and altered and re-altered his ideas. So on education also, it's not that whatever Gandhi has to be said has to be directly applied. I think when you apply it, in the present context, you will have to revise it in a very significant way. But what is important is that this policy or whatever idea of it, it's not a policy. I think it's an idea of education. I think is something that has to be applied in the context of the present day materialism, because whatever Gandhi has said, whatever Gandhi has argued in terms of his politics, in terms of his religious ideas, in terms of his social theory, I think is against materialism, which is not to say that he was completely rejecting materialism, but he was rejecting that materialism, that part of materialism which actually undermines the moral human self. So he has said that this several times, that he is not against machine, but he is against human slavery to machines. So I think whatever Gandhi has said, has to be applied, with a lot of, I think, rethinking about it. To say that, whatever Gandhi has said, 100 years back, has to be directly applied to it, has to be directly applied, is to say very is to represent very un-Gandhian kind of thing. There's nothing like, I think, no thinker can be applied that way, whether it is Marx or Ambedkar or Gandhi. I think your time, their time, our time, their time. There is a continuity between their time and our time, but there is also a significant change between our time and their time. So therefore, there is nothing like application, straightforward application. There is only, I think, a very innovative, revised kind of, an application. So Gandhi on education, Gandhi on politics, Gandhi on ethics, Gandhi on religion, needs to be revisited, re-examined, because Gandhi himself said that truth has to be experimented. Gandhi's truth cannot be my truth or your truth. My truth need not be your truth. So unless you discover your truth, you discover yourself what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is bad, and who is you. You are not, as I said, the liberal individual, always, self-motivated, self-interested. You are a human self, always listening to your antaratma, internal self. And if materialism for Gandhi is bad because it disorients human beings from listening to their internal voice. And those who do not have the capacity, and those do not, listen to their inner self, antaratma, is not a human being. So for Gandhi, therefore, the external is less important, or at least it is important to the extent that it is connected to the internal. So any law is right or wrong on the basis of what your internal self, what your introspection tells you about it. So I think there's nothing like a Gandhian model of education, a Gandhian model of village, a Gandhian model of politics, which you straight away apply to your time. I think Gandhi, as I said, as I continuously said, is that critical space. He makes you think. He makes you think, which you generally, think very seriously, which you otherwise generally accept. When we say nation, okay, we say that, okay, we have to accept it. Secularism, accept it. Because this is something that is given to you. Something that is that you think very normal. It is very normal to be secular. It is very normal to be nationalistic. It is very normal to be religious in the sectarian sense of the term. But Gandhi says no. Without denying the substantive aspects, Gandhi said, you need to think about yourself and, conceive of your own distinctive, religious perspective. Without, of course, rejecting your past, your tradition, the distinct sect from which, you come from. Gandhi comes from a very distinctive Vaishnava sect, and all those features of that Vaishnava sect is there in Gandhi, but in a very different sense. So therefore, I think when you ask this question on education, I think we need to very seriously think of the kind of materialism that we are living today, of the kind of capitalism that we are living today, of the kind of nationalism that we are living today. How do we apply this? In what form we apply it? In what way we apply? So that is what is experimentation with truth. So the education, what Gandhi has said, is not out there. It is there for your experiment. You think about it. What aspect of that education has to be applied, and applied in what way?
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for answering all the questions asked by the participants. We are coming to the end of the QA sessions. There is no any questions from chat box. So over to Candida ma'am.
Thank you, Uma ma'am. Thank you, sir, and participants for asking the questions, and sir for answering the questions with ease. With With this, we come to the end of today's session. I now request Mr. Prashant SP to kindly deliver the vote of thanks and officially conclude today's program. Before I call upon Prashant sir, I would like to inform the participants that the feedback form will be displayed in the chat box. Kindly fill it and the certificates will be sent to your registered email IDs within 7 working days.
My honor. It's my honor to deliver the vote of thanks. I would like to thank our resource person, Professor Rajaram Tolpadi, for your thought-provoking presentation, which helped us to extend our understanding of Gandhi's political ideas. Thank you, sir. I would like to thank Dr. T. Tomashekar, Chairman of Indian Academy Education Trust, Ms. Bharati, Secretary of Indian Academy Education Trust, and Dr. Srinidhi K. Parthasarathi, Chief Operating Officer, Indian Academy Group of Institutions, for providing, in their absence, for providing opportunity to organize this webinar. A special mention to our respected principal, Dr. E. Jerome Xavier, for his constant support and guidance in organizing this webinar successfully. With a deep sense of appreciation to all my colleagues for their continuous work. My sincere gratitude to all the participants for gracing the occasion and sharing their opinions today. This program would not have taken place without technical support. Thank you to Mr. Chandan Rao for providing all technical support. Thank you, one and all. Have a pleasant day. Happy weekend. Take care.